So earlier on Friday, both Ripple and the SEC submitted a joint briefing schedule. This schedule is what's going to dictate the rest of this SEC versus the Ripple case. And this schedule goes over things like motions, oppositions, and replies to the oppositions, and when those dates are actually due by. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the scheduling of the rest of this Ripple versus the SEC case, when it might actually see a summary judgment, or if not, possibly go to trial. And I'm just warning you up front, if you are an XRP holder, if you are a fan of Ripple, if you would just like to see this case end, you're probably not going to like this video. Because right now, as it stands, we're looking at sometime in the middle of 2023, and I'm going to explain why. Now, like I said, Ripple and the SEC submitted this jointly, which means Ripple actually agreed to this timeline. So why did they agree to such a long timeline? Well, I'm going to talk about what some of our favorite outside attorneys have been speculating as to why. And on top of it, that's not even the worst case scenario. Fred Rispoli, who is another outside attorney who is actually going after Jay Clayton and Bill Hinman by suing them personally before rescinding that lawsuit, has a few things to say about it, and his timeline's a little bit different. And his worst case scenario, well, you might not like it, but it includes going to the Supreme Court, but not until 2025. Hey everyone, my name is Randy, and welcome back to the Late Night Grind. Right now on this channel, we are covering the Ripple versus the SEC case, as well as other cryptocurrency news, investment markets, and personal finance. So if any or all these topics interest you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Late Night Grind community. Also, if you're feeling generous, I'd appreciate it if you do three things: smash the thumbs up button, watch this video all the way to the end, and check out my Patreon, link in the description below. If you do that, I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, guys, let's jump into it. Okay, so I wanted to get that out of the way when I started the video, that you're probably not going to like it. Outside of a settlement, which can happen at any time, it's looking more and more likely like this case will not get resolved until sometime in the spring, summer, possibly fall of 2023. Why? Well, here we go. So earlier on Friday, both Ripple and the SEC submitted their joint scheduling papers for the briefings for the rest of this case. Now, this includes some things like the summary judgment deadline, which is actually scheduled for August 2nd. Oppositions to any motions for the summary judgments are due by November 2nd. And replies to any oppositions are due by December 20th. Yes, a few days before Christmas. That is almost the exact 2-year mark of this case already. And so when I was looking at this and I was looking at some of the different responses and analysis, all of our favorite outside attorneys, Jeremy Hogan, John Deaton, James Filan, Fred Rispoli, as well as a couple of others, all seem to be coming to the same consensus that yes, we are looking at middle of 2023 by the time this would most likely get wrapped up. But I'm going to tell you a worst case scenario that Fred Rispoli had actually put forward on Twitter later in this video. Okay, so now that we actually have a good idea of this schedule, it's going to take us all the way to Christmas before this case is fully briefed. And like I said in my last video, Judge Torres, she just wrapped up another case in which she took 5 months from the time she was actually fully briefed to the time that she actually made a decision on it. Well, 5 months from the end of December, well, that's basically May of 2023. Are we gonna have to wait that long? Maybe. Okay, so why did Ripple go along with this such a long timeline? Especially after earlier today, Stuart Alderati, who is Ripple's general counsel, actually tweeted out how hard the Ripple team is actually working to move this case along, and how hard the judges are working to move this case along, and how the SEC is literally dragging their feet. Now, if you've been watching this channel or other channels that cover this case, that's no surprise. We should know by now that it's not really about winning for the SEC, it's about delaying. Playing the delay game is winning for the SEC. Okay, so why did Ripple agree with this? Well, as John Deaton and James Filan actually pointed out, there was probably some concessions that were made, because even though this seems like a long timeline, there was probably a much longer timeline that Ripple didn't want to see, so they probably ended up giving up some concessions in terms of different things that they would or wouldn't file in order for a shorter time frame. In other words, Ripple probably wanted to start the summary judgment process in May, and the SEC probably didn't want to start it until February. At least that was the speculation. So what did they do? So they basically met in the middle with some of these dates and deadlines. As we all know, this case is highly political. This isn't just about securities, right? Illegal securities that Ripple may or may not have been illegally selling back in 2013. As Jeremy Hogan pointed out, this case seems to be really backwards compared to some of the others. I've mentioned the library case a few times in which the SEC is going after library. Jeremy Hogan pointed out that the library case is actually moving along quite quickly compared to the Ripple case. It was actually filed 3 months later than Ripple, and it will probably finish up 6 months earlier than Ripple. The Ripple case is just taking forever. Things that make you scratch your head. Well, now comes in Fred Rispoli, who was the attorney that actually sued Jay Clayton and Will Hinman a couple of weeks ago, and I made a video on it. But he since spoke with John Deaton, and after a lengthy discussion, Fred decided to withdraw his lawsuit to allow this Ripple versus the SEC case to play out. But on Twitter, he laid out a few things about this case, some of which are a little more in line with what some of the Twitter sleuths that have been digging up all of these conflicts of interest with Jay Clayton and Bill Hinman from back in 2018. Because up to this point, guys like James Filan have kept it strictly on a legal sense. Well, Fred Rispoli goes a little bit deeper. He's saying, listen, this is a highly political case, and in case you didn't know, the SEC is just trying to delay this game. So in his opinion, this case is actually just meant to protect the old money like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, or the new chosen ones like Ethereum and Circle. He also made some interesting comments in Twitter regarding how much these attorneys are probably getting paid or billing for during work like this. Now, obviously, the Ripple has their own attorneys. He said a lot of these attorneys doing work like this full-time with all these motions in such a high-profile case, they're probably billing $2 million a month worth of billable time. Whereas on the SEC side, they're not a business. They don't have to worry about that. All they have is the attorney's salaries to worry about. They're probably very well paid, but nonetheless, it's probably not $2 million a month that they have to worry about. But from his point of view, he said the SEC isn't as concerned about winning this case. They obviously dropped this case without a care in the world as to how they would actually win it. They've just been trying to make it up as they go along. And as Fred's pointed out, it's clearly just a delay game for them because this isn't necessarily about winning, it's transactional for the SEC. Even if they lose, they're really only going to lose, at least in Fred's point of view, a little bit of power in maybe going after some of these other fintech companies. In my opinion, that could be a lot of power, but nonetheless. He said whoever it is, there's powers that be, these higher ranking powers that are telling SEC officials that they need to drag this case out a long time, as long as possible. Now, why are they doing it? Well, I'm going to get to that in a second, but I'm going to give you his worst case scenario right now. So as it stands right now, we're looking at 2023, and there's a possibility that nobody wins at summary judgment, and if that's the case, this case is going to go to full trial. Well, okay, so let's say that Ripple wins the case, or he points out that, let's say Ripple wins in summary judgment. Do you think the SEC is just going to let that go? Probably not. They're probably going to appeal it. Whether they go to the Second Circuit, whether they go to something like the Supreme Court. Well, that's going to take a long time because as he lays out, if this actually goes to trial, that's probably not going to happen until late 2023, possibly into 2024. Any appeals going to the Second Circuit will take even longer. And finally, by the time it might get to the Supreme Court, if it's actually taken up, we're looking at 2025 for something to actually happen. Now, in my opinion, that's probably a long shot. That's definitely the worst case scenario. If you're an XRP holder, oh my goodness. I told you were not going to like this video. Okay, so why all the delays? I tend to agree with Fred on this one, as well as John Deaton, and a lot of some of the Twitter sleuths that are going around trying to dig up essentially why this case was started. And that, yes, this case is highly political, but it's also because of the money that is tied up into something like Ethereum. Interesting that Ethereum, whereas it's now known Ethereum 2.0, that has been trying to move from proof of work to proof of stake for some time now, well, it keeps getting delayed and delayed even further. In my opinion, consensus layer 2, which is basically Ethereum 2.0, it's not ready yet. And so they want to make sure that this Ripple case doesn't finish up before that transition for Ethereum moves to proof of stake from proof of work in time so that they don't lose any market share. There is a lot of money involved in this. There is a lot of high profile players involved in this. Even though our favorite attorneys on Twitter aren't necessarily talking about it, There's a lot of underlying stuff going on, and bulls are certainly on parade in this one. So if you are new to this channel and you want to follow along with this story, I'd really appreciate it if you click that subscribe button and join the Late Night Grind community. Also, I want to invite you to visit the community tab. I put up polls up there on a weekly basis. Love to know what you guys think about these stories, the cryptocurrency world, investment market world, as well as a bunch of other things. So if you go participate, I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, guys, thank you so much for following this video all the way to the end, for smashing that thumbs up button, and as always, I'll see you guys on the next video.